My friend Nadia sent me a link to one of your videos 3 months ago. The testimony of the Pakistani woman who lost everything for asking one question in her mosque. I watched it 4 times that first night, sitting in my kitchen at 2 a.m., trying not to wake anyone. Her voice broke when she said Jesus' name. Something in my chest broke too. I never thought I'd be writing my own story like this, but after hearing hers, I realized I wasn't alone in what happened to me. Maybe someone else needs to hear this too. I was the imam's daughter who knew too much. While other girls my age giggled about boys and makeup, I was burning my brother Amir's drawings in our backyard, sketches of Christian crosses he'd scribbled in the margins of his math homework. "Promise me, Layla," he would whisper, pressing crumpled papers into my hands after school. "Promise you'll never tell Baba." I would take them to the courtyard after everyone was asleep, lighting matches with shaking fingers, watching the ash dance upward like twisted prayers. The community saw me as the perfect daughter, teaching Quranic verses to younger girls, helping Mama with charity work, always with my eyes downcast and my hijab perfectly arranged. They called me blessed. None of them saw me in that courtyard, destroying evidence of my brother's dangerous curiosity. I told myself I was protecting him. I had no idea I was protecting myself. The house was always full of voices during those years. Men coming to ask Baba about religious matters, women seeking Mama's guidance about their children. I moved through it all like a shadow, serving tea and staying invisible. Perfect daughters are seen but not heard. Perfect daughters don't ask questions. But late at night, when the house grew quiet, I would lie awake thinking about Amir's drawings. Why did he keep sketching that symbol? What was he searching for that our prayers couldn't give him? The weight of his secrets pressed against my ribs like stones. Every Friday, I watched him sit beside Baba during prayers, his face a perfect mask of devotion. But I knew what his hands had drawn in private moments. I knew the questions that lived behind his careful silence. Sometimes I caught him staring at nothing during dinner, his fork halfway to his mouth, lost in thoughts he couldn't share. Mama would snap her fingers to bring him back. "Focus, Habiti. Your mind wanders too much." But I saw where his mind wandered. I was the keeper of his dangerous dreams, the guardian of his forbidden curiosity, the perfect daughter who burned evidence and kept secrets, who smiled when elders praised my righteousness, while ash from Christian crosses still clung to my fingernails. I told myself it was nothing, but something deep in my soul had already started whispering otherwise. The phone rang at 1:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. I remember the exact time because I was lying awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering why Amir was so late coming home from university. Baba's voice cracked when he answered. Something I'd never heard before. "Accident," he kept repeating to Mama as she collapsed into his arms. They said it was an accident. But 3 days later, at the tea house after the funeral, Amir's friend Saeed pulled me aside. His eyes were red, not just from crying. "It wasn't an accident, Layla," he whispered, glancing around nervously. They followed him from that place, that church. My blood turned to ice water. What church? That night, while everyone slept, I crept to the garden shed where Amir used to hide things. Behind old paint cans, I found his real phone, not the one he showed our parents. The message history made my hands shake. Conversations with someone named Father Michael. Plans to meet. Questions about faith, about love, about a God who suffered. The last message was time-stamped 20 minutes before the crash. I want to understand the man who died for love, not the one who demands it. I deleted everything, my fingers trembling so hard I could barely work the keypad. At the funeral, I had watched faces in the crowd, wondering which one knew. Which one had been watching my brother? Which one decided his questions were too dangerous to allow? The Imam spoke about accepting Allah's will, while Mama sobbed behind her black veil. I sat in the front row, the perfect grieving daughter, but inside I was studying every man who came to offer condolences. Their handshakes with Baba, their carefully chosen words, their eyes that wouldn't quite meet mine. "You have our prayers," they said. "Allah has called him home." But I heard different words now. I heard the whispers behind their prayers. I saw the relief in some faces. Relief that the Imam's son was gone before his questions could spread like infection. The weight of Amir's secrets had transferred to me. Every burned drawing, every hidden conversation, every dangerous thought he'd trusted me to keep safe. Now I was the only one who knew the truth about what happened to him. The house filled with mourning women for 40 days. They brought food and recited verses and told Mama that her son was in paradise now. I served them tea and accepted their embraces and said nothing about the phone hidden under my mattress. Nothing about the messages I'd read until I memorized every word. Nothing about the way Father Michael had written back after the accident, asking if Amir was safe. The messages kept coming for weeks. "Is he all right? Please respond. I'm worried about him." I never answered, but I read every message. Father Michael's words were different from any religious man I'd known. He asked about Amir's heart, not his obedience. He spoke of God's love like it was gentle rain, not burning fire. He wrote about suffering that leads to understanding, not suffering that punishes doubt. Every message was like finding another piece of my brother's secret soul. Something caught in my throat like a splinter every time I saw those words. I didn't know why, but I couldn't stop reading them. 3 weeks after the funeral, I sat in the front row of Friday prayers while Baba delivered his sermon about accepting God's will. His voice echoed off the mosque walls as he spoke about my brother's tragic accident, how Allah tests those he loves most. The congregation nodded along, their faces peaceful, trusting. But something cracked inside my chest as I listened. He spoke about Amir like he knew him, like he understood the son who sat beside him every Friday, hands folded, eyes downcast. But Baba didn't know about the phone in the shed. He didn't know about Father Michael or the questions that had consumed my brother's last months. He didn't know that Amir disappeared because he was searching for something our faith couldn't give him, something that made him willing to risk everything. During the part about obedience to Allah's plan, I started laughing. It began as a quiet sound, almost like crying, but it grew louder. The woman beside me turned to stare. Mama reached over and grabbed my wrist, her fingers digging into my skin. "Layla," she hissed under her breath, but I couldn't stop. The laughter bubbled up from somewhere deep and broken, a sound I didn't recognize as my own. The Imam's daughter, losing her mind in the middle of Friday prayers. The congregation shifted in their seats, uncomfortable murmurs rippling through the rows. Baba's sermon faltered as he watched his perfect daughter laugh at his words about divine wisdom. They thought grief had broken me. They were wrong. Knowledge had broken me. I knew my brother was taken from us for asking the same questions that burned behind my ribs. I knew someone in this very room had decided his curiosity was too dangerous to tolerate. I knew that every word about Allah's mercy was hollow when they could silence a 20-year-old boy for wanting to understand love. Mama pulled me to the back of the mosque, her grip tight enough to bruise. The other women watched us go, shaking their heads with practiced pity. Poor Layla. The loss has affected her mind. She needs time to heal. But their eyes held something else. Suspicion. Fear. Like madness might be contagious. That night, I lay in bed with Amir's phone pressed against my chest, scrolling through his messages with Father Michael. The priest had stopped writing after 2 weeks of silence, but his last message sat unread in the conversation, a single line that made my heart race every time I saw it. Jesus weeps with those who mourn. He knows what it means to lose someone you love. I stared at those words until they blurred. Jesus. The name Amir had been searching for. The man who died for love instead of demanding it. In our house, God's love came with conditions, with tests, with the constant threat of divine anger. But this Jesus that Father Michael wrote about seemed different, gentler, more like the love I'd seen in Amir's eyes when he drew those crosses. The perfect daughter was cracking along the edges, and I could feel pieces of her falling away. Every laugh during Baba's sermon, every secret message I read, every question that Amir's disappearance had planted in my mind. I was becoming someone they couldn't recognize, someone they would fear. And deep down, I knew I was becoming someone they might decide was too dangerous to keep around. That was only the beginning. I didn't know they were already watching me too, and I would give them so much more to see. I found his grave on a Thursday morning, kneeling alone among the headstones, with wilted flowers clutched in my shaking hands. The marble was still new, Amir's name carved in Arabic script that seemed too small to hold all the questions he'd died asking. I was whispering apologies to the stone when footsteps approached behind me. "Your brother asked beautiful questions," said a voice, gentle and careful. I turned to see an old man with kind eyes and silver hair, wearing simple clothes that didn't mark him as imam or scholar. His English carried a slight accent I couldn't place. He looked at Amir's grave with the expression of someone who had lost something precious too. I should have run. Every instinct trained into the imam's daughter screamed danger. Strange men don't approach Muslim women in graveyards. Strange men don't speak about your dead brother like they knew him. But hunger kept me rooted to that spot. Hunger for someone who understood the secret heart Amir had hidden from our family. He wanted to understand love that sacrifices. The man continued, his voice barely above a whisper. Not love that demands sacrifice. The words hit me like lightning. This stranger understood my brother better than anyone who had wept at his funeral. Better than Baba, who preached about accepting God's will. Better than the mourning women who called Amir's death a divine test. "Who are you?" I whispered, though part of me already knew. "Father Michael," he said simply. Your brother came to my church 3 times before he died. He had questions about Jesus, about what it means to love someone enough to die for them. He was searching for something real, something that wouldn't demand his silence in return for acceptance. My chest tightened until I could barely breathe. This was the man Amir had been meeting, the one whose messages I'd read until I memorized every gentle word. The dangerous stranger who had offered my brother something our faith couldn't give him. Standing here beside Amir's grave, I understood why my brother had risked everything to keep meeting this priest. Father Michael reached into his jacket and pulled out a small book, worn at the edges like it had been read many times. He held it toward me but didn't insist when I hesitated. Amir asked me to give this to someone who would understand why he needed it, he said. I think that someone is you. The book felt warm in my hands, heavier than its size suggested. Only later would I realize what I was holding. Only later would I understand that I was already lost the moment I didn't walk away. That night I hid the book inside my Quran case, my hands trembling as I touched the cover. The Gospel of John, it said in simple letters. I had never held a Bible before, never even seen one except in angry sermons about corruption and lies. But Amir had touched these pages. Amir had found something here worth dying for. The perfect daughter who burned evidence and kept secrets was about to become something much more dangerous. She was about to become a seeker. I didn't know yet that Father Michael had been watching our family since Amir's death. I didn't know that he was part of something larger, a network of people who helped others like my brother find the love they were searching for. All I knew was that for the first time since the funeral, I wasn't alone with Amir's secrets. Someone else carried the weight of his questions. Someone else understood why he couldn't stop searching for a God who died for love instead of demanding it. But understanding came with its own price, and I was about to learn just how much truth could cost. The address Father Michael had whispered led me to a basement beneath Fatima's house. My childhood friend, who used to braid my hair while we memorized Quranic verses, now opened her door with nervous glances up and down the empty street. "Come quickly," she whispered, pulling me inside. They're waiting. 12 women sat in a circle on cushions, their faces illuminated by candles flickering in the dim space. Some I recognized from our mosque, others were strangers, but all of them carried the same expression I'd seen in my own mirror lately. The look of people harboring dangerous secrets. The look of those who had found something they weren't supposed to want. Fatima gestured for me to sit between 2 women who smiled with trembling lips. "This is Layla," she told the group. Her brother was Amir. Several heads nodded with understanding that made my chest tight. They knew. Somehow they all knew about my brother's search. The woman to my left spoke first, her voice barely audible. "I dream of a man with scars on his hands," she whispered. "He tells me I'm worth dying for, that I matter more than rules and expectations and perfect obedience. In my dreams, he never asks me to prove my love. He just gives his own freely." The circle murmured soft agreement, like she had spoken something they all recognized. Another woman, older with gray streaks in her hijab, began crying as she shared. "My husband beats me when I ask questions about faith, when I wonder why Allah's love feels so angry all the time. But this Jesus that I read about in secret, he says I'm precious. He says I don't deserve violence. He says love doesn't bruise what it claims to cherish. Her words broke something open inside me. One by one, they shared their stories, dreams of Jesus, secret reading of gospel verses, prayers whispered in bathrooms and closets where no one could hear them ask for the kind of love that didn't demand perfection. These were Muslim women like me, wives and daughters and sisters, all finding something our faith couldn't give them, all risking everything for a glimpse of grace that didn't come with conditions. When they asked me to share, I pulled Amir's hidden phone from my purse with shaking hands. "My brother died looking for this love," I whispered, showing them the messages from Father Michael. He was killed for asking the same questions that burn inside all of us. Why does God's love feel so far away? Why does faith require so much fear? Why do we have to earn what Jesus gives freely? The circle closed around me like arms, these dangerous women who had chosen curiosity over safety. For the first time since Amir's death, I felt like I belonged somewhere, not as the Imam's perfect daughter, not as the keeper of shameful secrets, but as someone searching for truth even when truth could destroy everything familiar. Fatima handed me a small key when the meeting ended. "There's a room upstairs where you can read in peace," she said. "Father Michael left some books for women like us, women who need to know what love looks like when it doesn't demand sacrifice. Women who are tired of being afraid of the God they're supposed to love." I took the key with both hands, understanding that I was accepting more than access to a room. I was accepting a new identity. I was choosing to become the kind of woman they would kill. Something shifted in the air that night, as if the ground beneath my feet was no longer solid. I came home to find him sitting in darkness, the small book Father Michael had given me open in his lap like evidence at a trial. Baba didn't look up when I entered, didn't acknowledge the sound of my keys hitting the table or my sharp intake of breath. He just sat there in his chair, reading words that could destroy us both. "So," he said without raising his eyes from the pages, "my daughter follows her brother into apostasy." His voice was ice, colder than I'd ever heard it. I expected rage, screaming, the violence that came with religious betrayal. Instead, there was this calculated calm that frightened me more than any outburst could have. I stood frozen in the doorway, watching my father read the Gospel of John by lamplight. His fingers moved carefully across verses about love and sacrifice, about a God who became human to bridge the gap between heaven and earth. Everything Amir had died searching for was spread across Baba's knees, and I couldn't tell if he was reading with curiosity or building a case for my condemnation. "Tomorrow you will confess publicly," he said, finally closing the book with deliberate precision. "You will burn this before the congregation. You will acknowledge your temporary weakness and beg Allah's forgiveness. And next month, you will marry Hassan's son as we arranged last year." The marriage had been postponed after Amir's death, but I should have known it was only delayed, not canceled. The words hit me like physical blows. Public confession. Burning the book that had meant everything to my brother. Marriage to a man I barely knew, sealing my fate as someone else's property, someone else's responsibility to control. I stared at this man who had raised me, who had taught me to read Arabic, who had once held me when nightmares made me cry. Now he sat planning my destruction with the same methodical care he used to prepare Friday sermons. And if I refuse, I whispered, though my voice barely carried across the room. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something die in his eyes. The love he'd carried for his perfect daughter evaporated like morning mist. "Then you never existed," he said simply. "Your name will be removed from our family records. Your photographs will be burned. Your room will be given to your cousin. No one will speak of the daughter who chose apostasy over obedience. The threat hung between us like a blade. Total erasure. Not just exile or disownment, but complete obliteration from the story of our family. It was worse than death, because death at least left memories. This was the promise of absolute nothingness, as if I had never drawn breath or spoken his name or sat beside him during Friday prayers. But even as terror clawed at my chest, something else stirred beneath it. Relief. The exhausting performance of being the perfect daughter was finally ending. The careful smiles, the downcast eyes, the silent service, the constant monitoring of every word and gesture, all of it was about to be stripped away. And underneath that fear, I felt something like freedom beginning to breathe. I looked at the book in his hands, thinking of Amir's messages, of the women in Fatima's basement, of Father Michael's gentle eyes beside my brother's grave. They had all chosen this same crossroads. They had all faced the choice between silence and truth, between safety and love, between the God who demanded perfection and the God who died to prove we didn't have to earn his acceptance. The perfect daughter was about to disappear forever, but something else was being born in her place, something that could survive erasure because it had found a love that didn't depend on performance or approval or even existence in family records, something that had learned to whisper Jesus in the dark and mean it with every broken piece of her heart. Everything I believed was cracking, but I had no idea my father's plan would force me to choose between silence and salvation. The confession was orchestrated like a public execution. Baba had announced my temporary weakness to the packed mosque, standing behind the minbar with the calculated precision of a judge delivering sentence. I was supposed to walk forward, repent for my curiosity, burn Father Michael's book before 300 witnesses, then accept my arranged marriage as the final seal on my return to obedience. The morning air was thick and suffocating as I sat in the front row, the small gospel pressed against my chest beneath my abaya like a heartbeat. Around me, the congregation waited with hungry eyes, ready to witness the imam's daughter brought back into line. Mama sat beside me, her fingers digging into my wrist, whispering urgent prayers for my soul, while Baba's voice echoed off the ancient walls. When he called my name, I stood on trembling legs and walked toward the front. The book felt heavier with each step, as if it carried the weight of every secret prayer I'd whispered in the darkness, every tear I'd shed over Amir's grave, every moment I'd felt Jesus' presence in the emptiness of my life. But as I reached the place where I was supposed to kneel and confess, something inside me erupted like a dam bursting. Instead of the rehearsed words of repentance, I clutched the book tighter and screamed the truth that had been clawing at my throat for months. where is your love?" The words tore through the sacred silence like lightning. The congregation froze, hundreds of eyes burning into me with shock and horror. Where is the mercy you preach? Where is the compassion for my brother who was silenced for asking questions? The mosque became a tomb of stunned silence. Baba's face turned ashen behind the minbar, his carefully planned ceremony crumbling as his daughter stood before Allah's house and demanded accountability from the men who claimed to speak for God. They took him from us for seeking truth. They destroyed a boy who wanted to understand love. Where is your God's mercy for that? Then chaos erupted. Voices shouted apostate and blasphemer, while hands grabbed my arms, dragging me toward the exit. I felt my hijab slip as they pulled, my hair escaping in wild strands, the perfect daughter's facade finally torn away. The book fell from my hands and skittered across the marble floor as they hauled me through the heavy doors and threw me onto the stone steps. The silence that followed was deafening. They had ejected me like poison from the body of the faithful, leaving me crumpled on the steps while the heavy doors slammed shut behind me. I could hear muffled voices inside, Baba's damaged authority trying to restore order to the chaos I had created. But in that silence, broken and exposed on the cold stone, I heard something else, a whisper that seemed to come from the air itself, gentle and unmistakably real. I am here. I looked up through tears and disheveled hair, expecting empty sky. Instead, the morning light seemed different, softer, as if filtered through grace itself. The words I had screamed inside the mosque echoed in my mind, but now they carried a different weight. I had demanded to know where God's love was, and something had answered. "You spoke truth in my Father's house." The whisper continued, and I understood that the voice belonged to the man whose book still lay scattered on the mosque floor. "You asked for love, and here I am." The perfect daughter was gone, erased by her own hand in the place where she had been taught to worship. But something new was being born on those steps, something that could survive rejection because it had found acceptance that didn't depend on performance or bloodline or religious approval. I sat there for hours as the sun climbed higher, feeling the weight of my old life lifting like a fever breaking. People passed on the street, some staring at the imam's daughter who had lost her mind, others hurrying by to avoid association with my disgrace. But I felt lighter than I had in months, free from the crushing weight of pretending to be perfect for people who confused control with love. That evening, Father Michael found me still sitting there, my back against the mosque wall, watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. He didn't speak at first, just sat beside me on the steps where I had been cast out, his presence as gentle as the evening breeze. "Your brother would be proud," he finally said, his voice thick with emotion. He dreamed of someone brave enough to ask those questions out loud. I looked at this old man who had known Amir's heart better than his own family, who had offered my brother the love we couldn't give him. I did not understand everything that had happened to me that day. The road ahead was uncertain, marked by exile and the loss of everyone I had ever called family. But as I sat on those steps where love had been rejected, I knew with absolute certainty that I was not alone anymore. Something had found me in my breaking. Someone had answered my desperate question about love by offering his own, freely given, without conditions or demands for perfection. The daughter who had shattered on the mosque steps was gone. But in her place, something new and unbreakable was being born. They left me on the mosque steps like discarded refuse. Rain began to fall as the sun disappeared behind gray clouds, washing away the dust of my old life, the careful makeup of the perfect daughter, the last traces of who I used to be. I pulled my torn abaya tighter against the cold, but the shivering came from somewhere deeper than weather. Hours passed. The street emptied as people hurried home to warm dinners and familiar prayers. I sat there shaking, not from cold, but from the enormity of what I had done. The words I had screamed still echoed in my ears, bouncing off the mosque walls like stones thrown at glass. I had shattered something that could never be repaired. That's when I felt him. Not in whispers this time, not in gentle nudges or half-remembered dreams. He came in the storm itself, his presence filling the empty street until the very air seemed to vibrate with grace. Lightning split the sky, illuminating a figure walking toward me through sheets of rain. My heart stopped beating. Layla, my name spoken by a voice that knew every secret I had ever carried, every tear I had shed in darkness, every desperate prayer I had whispered when I thought no one was listening. I looked up through water streaming down my face, unable to tell where the rain ended and my tears began. Jesus stood before me, his clothes soaked, his hair plastered against his forehead, but his eyes burning with a love so fierce it made me forget how to breathe. The wounds on his hands were visible even in the dim light, proof of the sacrifice Amir had died trying to understand. "You spoke truth in my father's house," he said, his voice carrying over the thunder. "You demanded love where only law had been given. You asked for mercy where only judgment had been offered." The rain streamed down his face like tears, as if he wept for every daughter who had been cast out for asking dangerous questions. I tried to speak, but only sobs came out. This was the man Amir had been searching for, the God who died for love instead of demanding it. Standing here in the storm, I understood why my brother had risked everything to know him. This wasn't the distant Allah of my childhood, demanding perfection and punishing curiosity. This was Emmanuel, God with us, God soaked to the skin and weeping in the rain. "Your brother is with me," he continued, and his words hit me like lightning. "He's safe now, free from all the questions that tormented him, free from the fear of asking and the pain of being silenced. He wanted you to know that his search wasn't in vain. He found what he was looking for." I reached toward him with trembling hands, needing to touch this impossible presence, to prove he wasn't just grief and desperation taking the shape of hope, but he was already reaching for me, his scarred hands gentle as they lifted me from the cold stone. The moment his fingers touched mine, warmth flooded through my body like sunlight after months of winter. Every broken place inside me began to heal. Every question that had tormented me found its answer in his touch. This was what Amir had died searching for. This was why Father Michael risked everything to share the gospel. This was why the women in Fatima's basement gathered in secret circles. Love, real love. Love that didn't demand perfection or punish curiosity or require daughters to disappear when they asked uncomfortable questions. Love that came looking for the lost instead of waiting for them to find their way home. Love that stood in storms and got soaked to the skin just to prove it was real. "You are my daughter now," he whispered, his voice cutting through thunder and rain and the chaos in my heart. "Not because you've earned it, or proved worthy, or kept all the rules, but because I chose you, because I've been calling your name since before you knew mine. Because love doesn't wait for permission to give itself away." I collapsed against him then, sobbing into his chest, while rain poured down around us. Every wall I had built, every mask I had worn, every careful performance of the perfect daughter crumbled in his arms. I was naked before God, not in shame, but in relief. Finally free from the exhausting work of earning what he had already given freely. The lightning faded, and the thunder rolled away. But Jesus remained, his presence wrapped around me like a blanket, warm and safe, and absolutely real. When I finally looked up, the street was empty again, the rain nothing more than gentle mist. But everything had changed. I wasn't the imam's daughter anymore. That girl had been washed away in the storm, along with her careful obedience and crushing fear of imperfection. I wasn't even Amir's sister, defined by the secrets I kept and the truth I protected. I was simply his, chosen, beloved, daughter of the king who got soaked in storms just to prove his love was real. The old life was gone, burned away in the fire of divine encounter. The new life was just beginning, marked not by rules and expectations, but by grace beyond comprehension. I stood on legs that felt new, in skin that felt clean, with a heart that finally knew what it meant to be completely, unconditionally loved. Everything I thought I knew about God had been shattered on those mosque steps, but in the ruins of my old faith, something infinitely more beautiful was being born. Not religion, but relationship. Not duty, but delight. Not fear, but fearless love that could weather any storm, because it was anchored in the one who commands the wind and rain. I walked home through empty streets, my torn abaya dripping, my hair uncovered, my face radiant with the kind of joy that comes only after complete surrender. Tomorrow would bring consequences. Tonight, I was simply a daughter who had finally met her father face to face in the storm. 6 months later, I stood in Father Michael's kitchen, sunlight streaming through windows that had never known the weight of heavy curtains or the fear of curious neighbors. The smell of fresh bread filled the air as I prepared breakfast for the family that had chosen love over blood, grace over genetics. This house had become our sanctuary, our gathering place, our proof that God builds families from the most unlikely materials. The children arrived first, as they always did, their laughter echoing through rooms that had learned to welcome joy without reservation. Miriam, barely 6 years old, climbed onto my lap with the easy trust of someone who had never been taught to fear questions. Her mother, Nadia, sat nearby, still wearing the careful expression of someone learning to believe that safety could be real and permanent. Nadia had been the second woman to find us, appearing at our door 3 months ago, with bruises hidden beneath long sleeves and fear carved so deep into her bones that she flinched when anyone moved too quickly. Her husband had discovered her reading the Gospel of John in their bathroom, The same small book Father Michael had given to Amir. The beating that followed sent her to the hospital with stories about falling down stairs that no one believed, but everyone accepted. Now she helped me arrange cushions in our circle, her movements still tentative but growing stronger each day. Freedom was a muscle that had to be exercised slowly, carefully, like learning to walk again after years of paralysis. But she was learning. We all were. Fatima arrived next, bringing Zara and her twin daughters, followed by Sarah, who still jumped at unexpected sounds, but had finally stopped apologizing for taking up space. Our little family had grown from 4 to 8 women and their children, all of us refugees from a faith that had confused control with love, submission with relationship, fear with reverence. The morning routine had become sacred in its own way. We gathered in Father Michael's living room, children playing quietly on the carpet, while their mothers formed a circle of chairs and cushions. I opened the worn Bible that had replaced my carefully memorized Quran, its pages marked with tears and highlighted with discoveries that still took my breath away. Today we read from Matthew, the story of Jesus calling his disciples, "Come, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." The words settled into the quiet room like seeds finding fertile ground. These women who had been taught that their questions were dangerous, their curiosity sinful, their very thoughts requiring permission from fathers and husbands and imams, sat listening to stories of a God who invited participation instead of demanding silence. When I finished reading, Miriam raised her small hand with the solemnity of someone asking the most important question in the world. "Sister Layla," she said, using the title of respect these children had given me, "why did Jesus want them to catch people like fish?" The other women tensed slightly, still programmed to fear questions that might not have approved answers. I smiled and pulled her closer, remembering the way my own questions had been met with slapped hands and warnings about dangerous thoughts. "Because fish live underwater where they can't breathe properly," I told her. "Jesus wanted his friends to help people find the place where they could finally breathe freely, where they didn't have to hold their breath anymore." Understanding bloomed across her face like sunrise, and I saw the other women relax into the beauty of watching curiosity celebrated instead of silenced. This was what we were building here, a place where questions were welcomed, where wonder was nurtured, where the next generation could grow up knowing they were loved for their hearts, not their compliance. After the children went outside to play, we adults settled deeper into our circle for the sharing time that had become the heartbeat of our mornings. Today, Sarah spoke for the first time since arriving 2 weeks ago, her voice barely above a whisper, but growing stronger with each word. "I used to pray 5 times a day," she said, tears streaming down her face. "But I never felt like anyone was listening, like I was just talking to an empty sky and hoping something up there cared enough to pay attention. Last night, I talked to Jesus like you taught us, not formal prayers with the right words in the right order, just talking, like he was sitting right there beside me. And I felt heard, really heard. For the first time in my life, the circle murmured soft agreement. These women who understood the difference between performing prayers and having conversations with someone who actually wanted to hear from them. We had all discovered the shocking intimacy of a God who preferred honest questions to perfect recitations, raw hearts to polished presentations. Zara shared about her teenage son who had started asking dangerous questions at home, his curiosity awakened by seeing his mother's transformation. Instead of panicking, she had decided to bring him to meet Father Michael, to let him ask his questions in a place where they would be welcomed rather than beaten out of him. The courage in her voice made my chest tight with gratitude for how far we had all traveled from the women we used to be. When it was my turn to share, I found myself talking about Amir again, as I often did during these morning circles. 6 months after meeting Jesus in the storm, the grief for my brother had transformed from crushing weight into gentle sadness, mixed with profound gratitude. He had blazed the trail that brought me here, his questions opening the door his sister would eventually walk through. I told them about the letter I had received last week, forwarded through Father Michael's careful network. Mama had written, her handwriting shaky with emotion, asking if I was safe and if there was any way back home. The women listened as I read her words aloud, feeling the weight of a mother's love, competing with religious obligation, longing, fighting against duty. I had written back, not with answers, but with an invitation. "Come and see," I told her, borrowing words from the gospel. "Come and meet the family I've found, the love I've discovered, the God who knows your name and counts your tears. Come and see what your son died searching for." I didn't know if she would come. The risk was enormous for a woman married to an imam, the potential consequences devastating. But seeds had been planted, and I had learned to trust the God who specialized in impossible gardens, who grew families from scattered refugees and built hope from shattered dreams. As our morning circle ended and the women began preparing for their various jobs and responsibilities, I found myself standing at the kitchen window, watching their children play in the garden. Father Michael had lovingly tended for decades. These little ones would grow up differently than we had. They would know from their earliest memories that God smiled when they asked questions, that their worth wasn't tied to their performance, that love was freely given rather than carefully earned. The afternoon brought new visitors, as it often did. 2 young women arrived together, clutching a scrap of paper with our address written in careful Arabic script. They had heard whispers about a place where Muslim women could ask questions about Jesus without fear, where curiosity was welcomed rather than punished. They sat in our living room with wide eyes and trembling hands, listening to our stories, like people dying of thirst, hearing about water. I served them tea and shared my own journey, watching recognition dawn in their faces as I described the night everything changed. They had felt it too, that stirring in their hearts when they heard Jesus' name, that sense of coming home to a love they had never experienced, but always craved. By evening, they had decided to stay, to join our small community of women learning to live as daughters rather than property. As darkness fell and our house settled into the peaceful rhythm of evening prayers and bedtime stories, I found myself in the garden where Father Michael was tending his roses, the old priest who had risked everything to answer Amir's questions, who had planted seeds of grace in hostile soil, who had become the father I never knew I needed. "Your brother would be amazed," he said without looking up from his pruning, knowing I was there the way he always did. 8 women, 12 children, all because a young man had the courage to ask dangerous questions about love. The ripples are still spreading, Layla. still reaching hearts that need to know they're not alone in their hunger for something real. I thought about the woman I used to be, the imam's perfect daughter who burned evidence and kept secrets, who lived in constant fear of discovery and disgrace. That woman felt like a character from someone else's story now, a shadow that had been burned away in the light of divine encounter. In her place stood someone I was still learning to recognize, someone unafraid of questions because she had found the answer, someone secure in love that didn't depend on performance. The stars emerged one by one in the clear sky above our garden, each point of light a reminder of the God who knew them all by name, who had carved out space in the darkness for beauty to shine. I whispered a prayer of gratitude for the journey that had brought me here, for the brother whose questions had opened the door, for the storm that had washed away everything false to reveal what was eternally true. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new women seeking refuge, new children learning to ask questions without fear. But tonight, surrounded by the family that love had built, I rested in the certainty that I was exactly where I belonged. Not because I had found my way home, but because home had found me. I was his daughter now, marked not by rules, but by relationship, defined not by compliance, but by the kind of love that weathers every storm and celebrates every question. The perfect daughter was gone forever, replaced by something far more beautiful. A woman who knew she was perfectly loved, just as she was, just as she would always be. In the distance, I could hear Miriam giggling at something her mother had whispered, the sound carrying across the garden like a promise of the future we were building together. A future where daughters could ask dangerous questions and find safe places to explore them. Where love didn't demand silence, but invited conversation. Where God was not a distant judge, but a father who got soaked in storms just to prove his children were worth saving. The house that love built stood strong against the darkness, its windows glowing with warm light, its rooms filled with the laughter of women learning to breathe freely. And in that light, surrounded by that laughter, I knew with absolute certainty that we were home.